So let me kick off our proceedings for our fantastic event, first in the series of three, welcoming you to our Balance in Business series. The first one of this will be Who Leads, Who Still Cares. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, first of all, my name is Gail Lamotte. I sit on the board of Balance in Business on behalf of the UK Alumni Association for INSEAD. And I'm actually standing in right at the minute for Florence Hamilton, who's our member who has founded this initiative and who will join us imminently. So Balance in Business has been created for the UK alumni to focus on rebalancing and encouraging our alumni, executives, senior managers, and the companies that we work with to focus on this issue of gender balance and gender diversity and give women a voice and a leg up in order to fulfill their full potential. At the core of Balance in Business originally is impact mentoring, which is the mentoring program that we created now some time ago, a couple of years ago, which has been phenomenally successful, particularly focusing on women in sort of their middle of their journey and trying to understand how can they best develop, what is it that we can do to support them to truly fulfill and have a voice and fulfill their career aspirations. Oh, I see Florence has not joined us, so I will hand over to her so that she can say a little bit more. Florence, I'm stepping in for you. So yes. Why don't I let you do this justice and tell us a little bit more about business and why we're here today.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I mean, Gail, I'm sure you did it more than justice.
Just started. Over to you.
I'm sorry?
Just started, so.
Okay, perfect. Well, as App said, you know, I'm the founder of this Balance in Business initiative and the Impact Mentoring. And I thought perhaps I'd give you a little bit of the background, a little bit of how this all started. And in 2017, as Apps mentioned earlier, we celebrated the IW50, which was 50 years since the first women were taken into business school. And at one of the events that we were running, we were chatting away. A group of young men and women approached me and said, "This is great. I really like what you're doing, but this is a 1-year celebration. What next? What will happen when the year is over?" And that made me think. And I was determined from that something had to be done. Talking was not enough, and a year was too short a time. A legacy needed to be left. And that's when I made a call for people to join me to do something to leave as a legacy. In 2018, we launched the Impact Mentoring Program, and that is how the Balance in Business initiative started. Who are we? We are a community of INSEAD volunteers who got together with the aim of inspiring and engaging leaders of today and of tomorrow with thinking of why balance in business matters and how to implement it. This initiative of ours stands on 3 pillars. The first one, which is very much at the core, is our impact mentoring, which has been designed with women in mid to senior positions in mind, and is based on our belief that the dual perspective is crucial for leaders in today's ecosystem. What do we do with that? Why did we decide to go with women in mid to senior positions? Because it's the fastest way to add to the numbers on the top, number one. And number two is because they become role models, which is extremely important to develop the pipeline. Mentoring to us is more of a journey of learning where both sides of the equation grow. The mentee as well as the mentor And this side is very important, just as important as empowering the mentee and supporting her to achieve her goals and her potential. We feel it's really important that the mentors, who are leaders in themselves and work for organizations across all sectors, that they learn what the real issues are, the real challenges women face are. And with that knowledge, and plus on our program, we add to it some toolkits, we hope that they will become agents for change. At the moment, we have 400 members as part of our community, 200 mentors, and we've had 197 women go through the program. Still early stages, but we hope to generate impact. The second pillar is partnering with organizations who believe in balancing their business and share their knowledge and widen their reach. A good example of it is our very generous sponsors, GenPact, who's helping us bring the message across today in this incredible debate. 21st, our knowledge partner. Dawn Capital, who's the founding partner of Impact Mentoring, and Cronus, who is our platform partner. We're starting, but we need to get together, individuals as well as organizations, if we want to generate impact. And last but not least is our outreach program, which is running events such as the one today, which are open events for everybody to come, partake, share, and learn. I'm a great believer in the individual, and I do feel that every one of us matter, and we matter now more than we ever mattered before. And therefore, I ask each and every one of us, because I believe we can do something. And if each and every one of us does something, one thing, no matter how small, together we will make impact. Together we will bring about change. I will stop now. That's all I wanted to say about what we're trying to do. I'll pass it on to Abs.
Thank you so much, Florence, and thank you, Gail. Like I said, my name is Abs. I'm an INSEAD alumni, and it is my passion for gender balance that drove me to lead this event and to be your host for today. And with that amazing introduction, hopefully, you get a good sense of what key messages we're trying to drive and leave with you. Oh, I can see there's a large number of you that have joined us today. It's really exciting to have all of you. Let's take a quick poll to see who we have represented amidst us today. So, it'll be quite interesting, to try and just get that sense as to, who we have amidst us. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to take you through the practicalities for the event. So that would be really great for you to know that everybody will be on mute till such time as obviously the speakers are speaking. Please look out at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think there are questions you'd like to ask the speakers at any point, just type them in. And of course, we'll do our best to answer most of your questions. If you would like an opportunity to be able to ask a question live, please do raise your hand. And again, we will do our best to give you that opportunity. The chat box is something we'd love to see buzzing to drive some of the engagement in our webinar today. Now, moving ahead to the much awaited panel. The CEO panel is the first of the three that we have. The next two will focus on the board and talent perspectives. Today, our focus is on the perspective of the executive, the CEO. With working lives changing and evolving more rapidly than we can imagine, now more than ever, we need to take the opportunity to accelerate balance in business. Our distinguished CEO panel will bring you hard facts, share their practical experience, and take your questions to bring about concrete solutions and galvanize you to take action. They will share their perspective on the role of the leader in driving gender balance together with business results, candidly describing successful and poorer attempts at making real change. My brief introduction of these CEOs, these are, must I say, amazing CEOs, will not do justice. And I'm sure you will discover for yourselves how great they truly are. I'm delighted to introduce our first panelist, Ronan Dunne, the EVP and Group CEO of Verizon Consumer. Ronan is not only responsible to lead all of his teams responsible for providing wireline, voice, data, and TV products and services, but also driving wireless connected experience to more than 100 million consumers every day. Our next panelist, Tiger Tyagarajan, CEO of Genpact. Tiger is one of the industry leaders who pioneered a new global business model and transformed a division of General Electric, GE Capital International Services, which is now called Genpact, into a global professional services firm delivering transformation. They have 90,000 employees globally that serves a ton of global clients. Last but not the least, Charlie Nunn, the CEO, Wealth and Personal Banking, HSBC. Charlie drives forward the consolidated retail bank and wealth management businesses, along with the global private banking business, which covers all of their customers' wealth as well as personal banking needs worldwide. This world-class panel will be moderated by none other than Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. Aviva is the CEO of 21st, a leading gender balance consultancy. She's a consultant, an author, an executive coach, and a change agent. She's also a mentor for INSEAD's impact mentoring and sits on the Balance in Business board. Aviva has written award-winning books and in fact has a blog at the Harvard Business Review and Forbes, and has been recently recognized as one of the top 40 women leading change. As you can see, we have an all-male panel, and as Aviva would call it, manel, and I'll let Aviva share more about this deliberate design. And some of you must wonder, where is the balance in this panel? But I'll let Aviva talk more about it. I'm hoping we are able to take a quick look at our poll results before I hand over to Aviva at this point. It'll be quite interesting to see how the teams are represented. So yeah, well, 74% women and 26% male amongst us. So great. Thank you so much for sharing that poll result. And Aviva, without much ado, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Apps. So delighted to be here with you. I think we have an amazing panel for us tonight. And I'm just going to introduce with a few remarks to frame a little bit our discussion. And the title was, as you could perhaps have seen, a little bit controversial. Who leads gender balance and who still cares in the midst of this insane year and crisis? How does it all hang together and what priority does it keep? And to answer to Apps, and particularly to our own panelists' question of why are there 3 men on this panel about gender balance, we just wanted to remind you that if you look at the biggest companies around the globe in all these different stock indices, you can see that they are overwhelmingly still led by men. And if we want gender balance, we're going to have to integrate and share the realities of why leaders are not prioritizing more this particular issue. And so we wanted to feature 3 CEOs who have focused on it, who have built balanced organizations, and have them share why they've found it to be of value. And also, because so often whenever we talk about gender balance, people immediately think about women as though it's a women's issue. And you can see from the poll, even with this panel, the audience today is dominated by women. And we strongly feel, and INSEAD's alumni mentoring system strongly feels that until it looks itself more balanced, it's going to be incredibly hard to lead the change. So how do you do that? If we look at this very recently published BoardX survey, you can see that the issue of gender balance has made a bit more progress over the last decade at board level than it has at ExCo level. And you can see that gray line is ExCos, the golds are boards, and that getting both balanced is not exactly in tune. And we'll also see a little bit later that many of the women who are on ExCos are in what Bordex calls roles of influence rather than roles of power, by which they mean staff jobs rather than line jobs. So will this lessons from this particular crisis, where we've seen so much media attention on women's rather skillful leadership through this COVID crisis, where they exhibited certain characteristics that I did some writing about, and particularly as it was in comparison to some what we might call toxic male leadership, do we think that this will contribute to a shift in recognizing that perhaps a bit more gender balance at the top might do us all good, both not only in politics and countries, but also in companies? Because we know from a growing number of surveys that I'm sure some of our panelists will refer to, that better balance has now been consistently correlated with better bottom line financial performance in business. So I would suggest that some of the framing, how we actually see this issue, is key. And very often we find companies are still presenting this as a women's issue, as a nice to have, as a social good, led by HR, led by women, for women, and about women. And we think it's high time that it was framed more strategically as a business imperative, led by CEOs and leaders, which is, as you can see, again, why we've designed the panel this way. We would suggest that a more generic, a more powerful framing would be that this issue is situated along some big 21st century millennial shifts that all companies are working on: web, weather, world, and women, technological change, sustainability crises, globalization and its discontents, and yes, the rise of women and how countries and companies are adapting to that rise. So some of the solutions that we might discuss today, certainly we have found that we need to move beyond stop fixing this women, stop everything being about women, by women, and for women, stop the slightly more recent blaming men, accusing everybody of bias, and start repositioning gender balance and working across genders as a management competency. Like all INSEAD alumni know, we spend a lot of time on cross-cultural competencies and working across nationalities. Why don't we teach those same kind of skills on working across genders? So in conclusion, I'm going to suggest that actually building balance, and I think this is what you're going to hear from our panelists, takes three things. It takes leadership, it takes a shift in culture, and it takes a lot of systemic adjusting to 21st century talent and markets. So our conversation is going to be organized around three questions. Why care? Who cares? How urgently do we care? And I'll start there. I'm going to pause within each of these topics to give time for audience questions after the panel discussion. Why care? What's going on that we're still so imbalanced in so many businesses? And how do we change? So I will turn with that. I'd like to start by inviting our panelists just to give us a short intro on, I'm going to take a personal slant first. How did you first become aware of this topic? When did it first enter your business or personal mindset? Tiger, I want to start with you because I think you have an interesting anecdote and cultural overlay to share with us.
Yeah, so Aviva and the INSEAD team and the Impact Group, thank you for having me on the panel. So where do I start? I've been on this journey with the company I'm in with now, Genpact, and prior to that with GE, on the journey of attempting to drive gender balance in the company and at all levels, including leadership, for 15, 20 years now. So if I scratch my head and say, so where did it all start? A little bit, it's life experiences. It's the way I think about the world. It's actually, core to the way I live. However, I have to say there's one seminal moment that actually woke me up to the real challenge. So I spent the early part of my career, the first almost 15 years, in a range of roles in India. And, in that world, the conclusion I came to was that India was a developing economy, an emerging economy. And when I made my move to the US in 2002, I said, I'm now going to a developed economy of the world. And hey, things like gender balance, etc., are already achieved there. There is no bias. There is no subconscious bias. There is no glass ceiling. Lo and behold, it didn't take too long to discover that actually it's as strong as it is in developing economies. And actually, in some respects, it's actually even more pervasive because everything else has made so much progress that the gap that this hasn't made progress is stark. So that was my first encounter. So I got even more resolve that this needs to be driven from the top, needs to have a business agenda, needs to be more than doing good, and so on and so forth. Everything that Florence, you and Aviva described has been part of our journey, and we're still on that journey.
So I'm fascinated by these cultural assumptions and overlays. Ronan, I think you might want to add from your homeland. You are also impacted.
Indeed, and firstly, hello everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this mammal. But mine is, I suppose, the early experience was the fact that the first business person that I met was my maternal grandmother, who ran a bar and grocery business in the countryside in Ireland. And because of the nature of her role, not only was she a businesswoman in her own right, but she also provided credit to the marketplace in that, because guess what? In a farming environment, when you're relying on crops and you have illiquidity, she essentially banked the local community. She fed the local community. She actually managed the health of the local community because she had the dispensary when the visiting doctor came. So when I was growing up, this idea of somehow or another, this patriarchal idea of business or leadership just simply didn't exist. And broadly, Ireland has a strong matriarchal tradition, including having, our first female president more than 30 years ago, from the same hometown as Joe Biden's family, as coincidence has it. But then when I got into the business world, I'm heavily involved with an organization called One Young World, which is a youth leadership global program. And the simple insight that drew me to that organization and has defined my approach in business is a really simple one, which is that talent is evenly distributed. It's simply opportunity that isn't. And in a world of competing for scarce resources, the opportunity for any smart business is to better match talent to opportunity than your competitors. And guess what? In that world, being underrepresented in any group, whether that be gender, whether it be ethnic diversity, whether it be cultural diversity, is just simply you're playing with one arm tied behind your back. So it's enlightened self-interest as far as I'm concerned, and it's also consistent with my very earliest experiences.
Charlie, you want to chime in on
thanks,
your cultural awakenings?
Thank you very much for having me on the panel as well. It's great to be here this evening. It's funny, I've got a story that straddles both, but you asked specifically for my personal moment of awakening, which I can be quite specific. And unfortunately, it potentially taints the US as well, Tiger. So for me, I spent the 1990s in various professions, which are a little bit unsavory, but I was on the trading floors for a big part of the 1990s in London, in New York, in Switzerland mainly, and a little bit in Asia. Those are the least diverse and inclusive environments I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. And in retrospect, and with the benefit of looking back 30 years almost, it's amazing to me that those environments existed. And then I did my MBA in the late 90s, and I went to San Francisco, and I was joining a consulting firm. I was made a partner. And two things happened in that context on the West Coast. And at that stage, I think the West Coast was ahead of the East Coast in terms of how it thought about diversity, inclusion, and gender and LGBT and other forms of diversity were right at the top of the agenda. The first thing was the HR department branded me what they called a walking lawsuit. A British guy from the trading floor that only had jokes that were inappropriate for all forms of inclusivity. So they were terrified of me. And then the second thing is they made me the leader of a lot of the diversity programs across the team. And it was a baptism of fire, I think. I suppose the more interesting thing for me, and a bit like Ronan and Tiger talked about, we'll get to the why question, but I then spent the next 20 years as a consultant creating teams, breaking up teams, 30, 40, 50 a year. And you get better outcomes, you get better decisions, they're more innovative, and you move at more pace if they're more diverse, and gender diversity is at the core of that. And I realized that very, very quickly on the West Coast.
So I'm gonna, from the personal to the professional, there was a recent article in HBR saying that maybe it was time to call the business case obsolete. And I'm wondering if you would agree and how you frame this business case. So Ronan, talent. I'd love if any of you put up there with talent customers. I find this topic often skews talent, and then we forget about the customer side of this issue. And when we see some of women's purchasing power these days, I wonder sometimes why. And do you think that your co-chief executives, with whom you hang out with, I'm sure, share the prioritization that you put on it? Or are you three still kind of a select enlightened bunch? Or are we going to mainstream this sometime soon? Charlie, why don't we go back to you first?
Well, look, for me, I've got a very clear belief around the why. The business case and some of the facts that you shared, I hope most people who are senior leaders in organizations, that's context, that's fact. And if they're not there, then they need to get themselves smart. But interestingly, that part of the why I hope is clear. I serve 39 million customers across 50 countries. The customer lens is hugely important for what I do. If you're going to properly represent and serve your customers, you need to represent that customer base in the teams that you build, and in all of the teams, not just the frontline teams supporting customers, but in the product and the innovation and technology and leadership teams. So for me, that's a huge theme around the why. The third one, which might seem light, but I throw it out there because for me, it's been massively important. I've had a chance to work in lots of teams. I've lived personally in 7 or 8 countries. The working environment is far more fun. It's more enjoyable. It's better behaved when there's better gender balance. So I get a massive personal fulfillment from working in more gender balanced teams. So hopefully the why for me is really clear. You asked about in my industry and certainly in my organizations, do I see other people feeling in the same way? I'm sure we'll talk about this later. Certainly in HSBC and actually financial services, I've been lucky enough to work with most of the big organizations. I think most people get the why. What I think people more struggle with is the how, and then the personal aspects of the how. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And that's not to say that everyone gets the why, but I certainly believe the biggest issue at the moment in my industry is helping people have the confidence to know how to lead and what changes to make and how to make this happen.
So just to test that hypothesis, Ladora, we have a little poll to see if our attendees agree that in their own organization, their leaders buy the why. Ronan, exception or the rule?
So I'll go out on a limb here, and it's not that I'm disagreeing in any way with what Charlie said. Is I think the why is broadly accepted, but I still think there's a significant group of male senior leaders who would describe it as why but. And the but then becomes availability of talent, somebody else's problem, not my sector, not my industry, not my whatever. And forgive me if I offend anyone, but as soon as men start the intellectual masturbation of the explanation away, we know we have a problem. It's a fundamental issue. I don't even, you may want to describe it as a human rights issue, but it's a fundamental issue. Is if you aren't representative of the talents and resources that are available to you, then by all objective metrics, you're not doing a good job as a business leader. To exactly what Charlie said is, how can I represent the interests, the aspirations, the attitudes of 100 million US consumers if I say, you know what, I'm going to take a proxy of an unrepresentative sample of 42 million and just guess for the rest? You know, it just makes no sense whatsoever. So I think now that we have established the why, what we need to do is address the but and just stop people getting in the way of saying this issue needs to be addressed, not explaining away why it's not their problem. So that's a huge consideration for me. And if I may use a parallel, because I believe you referenced this in part of the introduction, but this is, again, to use another word, this is intersectionality. The truth is, it's not just simply gender; it's diversity in all its aspects. And a very successful American sportswoman, Abby Wambach, who does some work with us at Verizon and who is a good friend of one of my colleagues, talked when she was talking about the idea of inclusion, and she said, you know, when you think about it, diversity may be making sure that you recruit enough females or you recruit transgender people. Inclusion is actually making sure everybody has a place to go to the bathroom. That's the sort of practicality that we have to bring to this. It's not about samples and data points. It's about the practicality of when they arrive in the workplace, are the conditions there that prevail, that is to make them the success they deserve to be. And I say them in the broadest sense of whoever that may be. Because otherwise what we're doing is we're playing quota games, or we're doing some of the intellectual, what I described earlier, rather than simply addressing the reality of, if we don't create an environment in which our people have the success they deserve to be, it's a fundamental waste of scarce resources.
So very often I hear, and I, you know, again, may I be just a bit controversial as you, and just to free up the tongues that we have on this thing, is I'm always a little amazed that we have bundled women into diversity somehow. Women and men have become a diversity dimension. So Tiger, I don't know about your business case, but do you think that's normal? Like, our gender diversity, are women one diversity among many to be managed, or are they more like, I don't know, the Chinese, a huge emerging powerful holder of purchasing power decision making that's going to make or break a lot of organizations? And 60% of university graduates, they're not some small minority to be managed among many, but perhaps an emerging 21st century power base. What would you think from your...
No, so that's really, Aviva, one of the angles and perspectives one could take, which is if the business rationale comes from, you know, that's the decision maker in the household for the products I sell, that's the powerhouse that I need to address, and on and on and on. However, if I take it one level higher than that, we are in a world where I think we would all agree that the way the human brain works has become better understood than people had an understanding of. And the way the human brain works is to get a variety of inputs and process it and come up with the answers and answers and answers. And each time the answer is better than the previous answer, because each time it's learned from the previous set of inputs and answers. And that's AI. How can AI work if the only input is coming from 20 people and they say the same thing? I just don't get it. So you know, it's similar to what Charlie said and similar to what Ronan said, which is the part of my frustration, and it's a little bit coming through in my tone. My frustration has been that for 15 years, most conversations of an hour and a half or 2 hours on this topic ends up spending 80% on why. And there's a good reason, because it looks like everyone needs to be convinced. And I'm sitting there and saying, I don't get it. Because the real issue is how. And it's not easy. We all know that. And that's where people struggle. But I now realize why the why is still important, because I don't think people still fully get it. And that's still unfortunate. Which is why sometimes it becomes lip service. Sometimes it becomes the but. There are so many other obstacles, etc. So my perspective is actually very similar to both Charlie and Ronan's articulation. Our business is 100,000 people who are in professional services that add value to our clients, global 1,000 companies. The only raw material we have is talent. Half the raw material in the world are women. Shame on us if we actually ignore that half. And in fact, it's such a stupid business proposition to actually attempt to run the best professional services company and say, I'm going to ignore half the world, even though there may be some great talent. I mean, how bizarre is that? And then if I take that forward to saying, because the world is filled with people who still don't get it, if we take a differentiated position on that topic, we'll get the best women in the world to be part of the team and really hit the ball out of the park. Because when you surround yourself with people who think differently, you get a better answer. And each time you get a better and better answer. And our job is to provide great answers for our clients and keep testing them out. So some frustration, some excitement that you can actually be a differentiated position. So
absolutely. So let's see if the audience agrees with us. Ladora, if you could share both the poll results and any questions that might have come, so you can see from the poll how convinced are your company's leaders. We've got a spread pretty evenly all the way across the board. And I do find that very often what we find is that leaders, particularly the progressive ones, say, we get the why, jump to the how, let's get moving. And my deepest conviction is we haven't even begun to sell the why. So I'm counting a little bit on you guys to help spread your conviction of this why. Ladora, do you have a question for us?
Yes, Kate, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hi there, and thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. It was really just a question to the panel, picking up on Charlie's point, and the observation that I often see, which is the delta between the rhetoric of senior leaders, on the importance of gender balance, but then that gap, that delta between actually how they actually behave, the actions they take when actually it matters. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Charlie, you should go for it.
Talk.
So this to me is part of the how, but all of us, at whatever level we are in the organization, the starting point is what you say when you're in a position of leadership, whatever level that is. The language you use, the environment you create in terms of level of inclusivity, and Ronan used that word. I'm a massive believer in, diversity, including gender, is local and even personal, but inclusivity is global, and the mindset and the culture you create around inclusivity. And then most difficulty is the outcomes that you, whilst you're in your leadership role, actually deliver, are being watched and tracked very closely. And I think I know who Kate is, which is great. She's part of HSBC, and HSBC, absolutely has those issues. We have a lot of people who talk about it, and we don't see the outcomes happen fast enough. Or we see people that will sit on a stage and talk as we have today about why we care about this, why this is important, and then won't be thoughtful about their unconscious biases or whether they're being fully inclusive in their language. And more, I would put that in the category of how, at least I probably am positively biased, Aviva, putting that in the category of the how. We see ourselves fall down in those areas. So I think it's a great point of perspective. It's definitely true of the male leaders. It's also potentially more controversial in Aviva. I didn't get a chance to say this. If we're going to have fun for the next hour, I will make some mistakes in this conversation, and I'll get some quotes around it. It's also really true for our senior female leaders as to how they role model and how they come across in those roles as well. So I think it's a really important question for us, and it's, for me, starting to unpack the more difficult part of really what leading around gender balance means.
So that's a very nice transition from going from the why question into the what, like what's going on and why are there gaps between. I just want to pause. Ladora, any other questions on the why that we might want to address to the other panelists? Patrick, are you going to give us a question?
Sure. No, I'd be delighted to. And thank you for what is already a fantastic discussion. My question was around the size of organizations and whether the panelists believe that large organizations are further ahead than small organizations in getting a decent gender balance. And if so, what can we do about it?
What can we do about it in terms of sharing the big ones to the small ones, or what do you mean by sharing?
Sorry, I mean, if we do believe that large organizations are further ahead than small organizations, how do we get small organizations to move forward as well?
Ronan, you want to take a jab at that? Large as you are.
I'd offer a perspective.
We lost your sound.
So can you hear me now? I'm off mute. Can you hear okay? Yeah. So large organizations sometimes have the ability to fudge it. So it doesn't actually mean, because data and the numbers can give you the perspective that they're doing lots of things. When you actually segment the data and say, does that mean at every level of your organization, or it just means I happen to have a call center, for example, and I happen to have 75% female in my call center, so magically my numbers look good. So to Patrick's question, I'm not criticizing big or small. I'm just saying sometimes the data from big companies is reflective of math, not intent or purpose or success in execution, just to be transparent on that. And I think to kind of linking to Kate's and the previous question, I think in that regard, what we do have to, as we move from the why, the what is to recognize that there are some very, very practical things that we need to think about doing that I think can be applied to small businesses or large businesses. And it's things like, insisting on gender balance shortlists. It's, there's some very practical, simple things that still allow you to make sure that you're always recruiting the right person for the job. But if you don't have a process that hands you a gender balanced or a diverse shortlist, well then, the decision maker is almost absolved from the responsibility. So I think there are some very practical things that I don't think are significantly influenced by the size of the organization, unless you're talking micro organizations with only 2 or 3 employees. So that's just an observation. I think the rules can apply mid to large, certainly.
Okay, Tiger, fudging or fudging?
No, I've never thought of this question, Patrick, so great question. And my instinctive reaction would have been larger companies, I didn't think of fudging as well, could be fudging, but I would have thought larger companies actually perform worse than smaller companies, in the same way that in technology, smaller companies are able to come with new technology, whereas larger companies, which are large and successful, but have legacy that they have to deal with. However, there's one thing that small companies have to fight through, or 2 things. One, in the small company, the founder, the CEO determines everything. In large companies, there are checks and balances. I think the CEO is still incredibly important on this topic, but there are checks and balances. There are leaders who have potentially the teeth to be able to come to the CEO and say, look, you better do something about this, otherwise I'm going to leave. Small companies, the founder CEO makes all the difference. And the second, I wonder if small companies pay enough attention to early culture. And, I think, Charlie, you referred to how people behave. I actually talk about culture in a very similar way, but the only thing I would say is culture is all about how people behave when confronted with decisions when no one is watching. And really it's about what do people do on these topics when absolutely no one is watching and no one will even know. And if the leader, founder, doesn't set that culture up front, I think you have the danger of some of those small companies becoming large companies that then have a bigger problem later.
Hey, Viva, can I add one more thing? Just to get the conversation going. So the risk of this conversation is many people don't know my organization. I'm not sure about Ronan's and Tiger's. So we have 100,000 people in my team, 195,000 people. Yes, 54% of the total number in the way that Ronan talked about are women. But we only have 34% of what we call our senior roles as women. Now that's gone from 28% in the last 3 years since we've been focused really, and I've been in role. But I don't want people to get the impression that I'm representing an organization that has achieved any kind of level of gender balance. I am coming here completely dissatisfied with our progress. And the idea that big organizations, including mine at least, I can't talk for the other colleagues here, we are not where we need to be. Now, there are parts of my organization which are 60% senior females, and there's parts which are 20%. And some of that's cultural, some of that's leadership, some of that's the context in which they operate. And we've got some brilliant examples, even within my own business, around how we achieve this. But I don't want anyone to think I'm sitting here representing the finished article. We are nowhere near where we need to be.
Okay, we will talk about your own individual teams, because I think you're also really, some of you walking the talk in gender balancing your own teams. But Charlie, I'm going to bounce right back to you then to lead us off into the what. What have you found in your 15-year negotiation with this topic? What are the top 3 obstacles? What is it? What's blocking?
Mindset. I think Ronan talked about it brilliantly. I love the but mindset. The mindset, assuming you've got past the why, and I love the challenge on that because it's very hard to unpack. Do people really believe it, or are they just being passive? The mindset is, by itself then quite difficult. So do I believe it, but I'm going to be passive? Do I believe it, but I'm still not going to recognize unconscious bias? Do I believe it and I'm prepared to talk about it and lead? Or do I believe it, I'm prepared to talk about it, I'm going to do some things that will create some negative reaction to get results? And maybe there's another one, but there's a massive spectrum of I believe it, but I'm going to be passive, through to I'm not only going to take action, I'm going to do things that I know some of my colleagues will say is proactive bias or exclusive in a different way. And I think that's the first really, really big thing. The second one for me, and I'll just talk about it and leave the colleagues talk about it. I loved, Ronan talked about one of my favorite things. I think this is incredibly practical when you start talking about the how, and I'm sure we'll go through that. There's a list of like 30 interventions we think of. One of is gender balance on the shortlists, and also, by the way, the interview panels. When you think about how you engage headhunters, as you think about your policies and procedures within HR, when you think about flexible working, there is a set of really long practical things that just grease the wheels and make the organization inclusive in all of the ways it needs to be. And that's a really big part to go alongside of it. I'll pause and let others talk.
So Ronan, top 3 obstacles, and just a sub question on that. Do you think this COVID crisis and all its adaptations has shifted anything in any way?
Well, maybe I'll come back to that on the COVID in a second, but I want to kind of tie something that Charlie said and that Tiger said is, again, forgive me, I'll be controversial. Women who seek to be equal to men lack ambition. This is not about the same. It's about celebrating difference. It's about recognizing difference in a real positive sense. And that's the physiological things. It's the way the brain works. It's all those other things. And I think that for me is when you get into the what, you can have some of these things that are ticks in a box where somebody can say, I've been audited externally, I'm doing this, this, and this. But success is not what you achieve inside the organization because you're not addressing the soft and other things. So from a very, very practical point of view, what I'm trying to do inside the business, we've just done a job taxonomy just to identify and clearly articulate roles and the key competencies associated with them so that I can create more modular career development inside the organization. Because what tends to happen is cultural behaviors, and I'll again, forgive me, I'll go out on a limb. One of our challenges is we live in a digital world, but we have analog parents who are advising digital children about what they should study at university in order to get a job that won't actually exist when those people come out of college. So we have to recognize some of those things structurally. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we look at the nature of work and actually start to redefine it in a way that's more modular, that says the nature of how you develop your career is more structured and is more intentional in creating hybrids of different roles, different experiences. Because I think at the nub of it, we do still have some cultural things about which roles people apply for. I think when you build on top of that, I think the flexibility of the workplace, and my personal view before COVID, but I'll bring COVID into it, is when I was the CEO of O2 in the UK, in the retail industry, actually people on the floor in retail, if you take it overall, tends to be a predominance of male. If you take cashiers, other things, you have subsets. But by bringing part-time working in, O2 ended up with more than 50% of the staff in retail female. But it wasn't just about part-time. It was about changing the way we paid people. We went away from box shifting quota hard sell to metrics that were directly associated with customer outcomes. And as a result, everybody thrived rather than just certain subsets thrived. So I think if I can frame it that way and then pass it on, is that I think you have to look structurally at the business you're in and the things that are the inherent barriers. You know, when we get to board level, we talk about unconscious bias, but these are structural biases that sit inside the way work gets done. And if we start to address those, what we do is we create much more flexibility for talent, which in my view liberates the talent to be the success it deserves to be, but also surprisingly allows you to be an employer of choice for a much wider and diverse group of talent.
So can I just bounce back off you for one subject on this idea that the ambitions of women to become more like men in order to succeed? Is that women doing that, or is that the culture of our organizations that are so masculine that the message is very clearly, if you don't pretty well become a man, you can't make it here?
Well, Aviva, and you challenged us a little earlier about this idea about whether putting women into the diversity bucket was justified. If the boards of and the senior executives of most of the big companies in the world are 93% male based on your data set, the answer is, it is justified. I hate to say it, but that's the reality. It's that context. And again, you know, this is a controversial topic, but we have a group called Women of the World, was called Women of Wireless, where we work very specifically with middle and senior women around the things that they feel are going to be important to them for them to succeed. And part of that program is actually addressing this idea that the price of success is not worth paying, because some of the senior women I observe, whether it be in our own organization or elsewhere, some people believe that the price that they've paid is not a price that they, as the next generation of future leaders, are willing to pay. And in those circumstances, yes, it is something about male environment, but some of it's about the behaviors that some have chosen to adopt because it was the only way that they would succeed. And I don't in any way criticize, but for an average 30-something female, I would, in my personal experience, less than half of the senior women inside any organization I've worked in have been perceived as role models for future leaders by the women inside those organizations, less than half. And mine is not a huge, diverse set of experiences, but I would be surprised if that's materially different from other organizations.
Yeah, I always suggest that companies get the women they design, right? And their attempts at designing evolve over time. But absolutely, this constant issue of the role models within organizations. And I'm curious, you also talk about educating women and helping women and, you know, balancing out their questions. What about men? Tiger, any work on men in organizations to build what I kind of call gender bilingualism? Do you think there's something about this idea of the ability of both men and women to work across genders? Is that just like a management skill that we're not teaching, and we're expecting kind of women to figure it out?
No, I think it's a huge problem. And I think gender is just one aspect of a bigger problem, which is, you know, people need to be able to appreciate cognitive differences. Again, I go back to, come on, that's our job. Our job is to bring cognitive difference opinions together and mesh all of that and come up with better answers. I would say the problem number one that often comes in the way is refusing to accept that it's okay to have hard metrics on this topic. I've had many conversations where the reaction is, no, we shouldn't have hard metrics on this topic because that means that we may not get the best talent. You don't say that to the leader of a lending business whose job it is to grow the lending book, but at the same time, make sure that there is not incremental beyond a certain level risk being taken. So you're going to achieve two, what some may say, contradictory goals. The job of leaders is to achieve goals which seem to be in contradiction with each other. So I want you to hit 30% gender diversity now that you're at 20%. And I want you to get the best talent in the world. I want both. The easy but answer is no. If you want this, then I'm not going to be able to give that. So that's one problem. Second problem is when you give the metric, the real owners of those metrics actually become men. Because after all, men are in those leadership positions more as a proportion. So they are more accountable. They have to be more accountable. It's their behavior that has to change a lot more. And that's, how do you interview? How do you actually write a resume? The words you use determine who applies often, and on and on and on. And the third one would be, you know, how do you make sure that you create role models, which means that sometimes, particularly organizations such as represented here, I'm sure I would speak, you know, on behalf of HSBC and Vodafone, and I certainly speak for our organization. We pride on growing our talent. And if the answer is, I'll get gender diverse at the leadership level in the next 10 to 15 years because I grow my talent, well, that's a cop-out. Go and hire some great women at the mid-senior levels and break some of the rules that you have where you say, we don't hire lateral leaders. At some point you will, you have to. Because otherwise, how do you have role models and examples? And certainly do it at the board level. Don't give me any excuses for the board. Right? So some of those become easy buts, to going back to the earlier comment, that you have to break through. And you know, it's actually very simple. It's a question of one day sitting together and saying, we're going to break all these rules. And these are the new policies and rules you're going to follow. It's not a big rocket science.
So sitting together and breaking all these rules sounds like another good transition into how to change. But we'll take a quick poll, our second poll, and see what the audience thinks of this whole topic of what is currently going on. And I'll ask Ladora again if there are any questions or anybody who wants to come in now on.
Hey.
Julie, absolutely.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, lovely to hear you all, and hello, it's a great panel. I wanted to ask a question. Today in the Financial Times, I don't know if you saw the leader, but the Financial Times picks up in the change in law, I don't know if you saw, in Germany. And you gave a very nice, interesting perspective of the number of the balance or unbalance in the companies. But basically, Germany will force listed companies to be gender balanced at board level, since the voluntary quotas don't work. So what do you guys think about legally binding quotas? I know that's very, it's a sensitive topic. Thank you.
So the inevitable question we always get on this topic, it's the quota word. And I'll just add to that. What's the difference between quotas and targets in your mind? Whoever wants to take a run at that.
I'm happy to start and then hand it off as it gets feisty on this particular topic, because it always does. So Julie, to the question, and in the same moment that Germany is doing that, most people probably don't know, but at the same day as the presidential election in the United States, California had a piece of legislation, and that was around essentially positive discrimination, positive affirmation in relation to particular racial diversity. And that was defeated in large part because of activism among the Asian community, who say the only victims of positive discrimination in the US are actually Asians, because they get less chance to go to the best universities, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's factually written up in the Wall Street Journal. It was an young Asian community leader who drove most of the program, which was to defend against that. And the legislation was defeated in this particular situation. But I think the challenge on the quotas is, it goes back to the why, but my worry about quotas, and I'm not saying we don't use them, and as you say, the nuance between quotas and targets is compliance with math versus fundamental change. And so consistently having 30% and having a rotation of businesses who don't necessarily develop their talent but meet the quota, I think is a risk. So striking a balance between the two, and I think that's where reporting, I think, becomes a significant factor, because the honest truth is boards are more concerned about losing a vote these days in public company boards, whether that be on remuneration, whether it be on their ESG, because they know that people will move their money. And putting your money where your mouth is the most influential thing that there is in publicly quoted businesses. So I think reporting, whether that be equal pay at the respective levels with other things, I think helps. Whether ultimately a quota will militate. I'll give you a good, if I may, from my own industry example. Competition on pricing in Europe among telecoms companies was such that roaming was the scourge for everybody. So the European Union set roaming prices. The minute they did, competition for pricing and roaming ceased in Europe. 105 licensed operators, and not one of them moved their prices. And in fact, when exchange rates moved, they used to up their prices to get them to the limits. Now, subsequently, the European Union eliminated the cost for roaming completely, which post-Brexit, you may have the opportunity to enjoy again in Britain. I'm not sure what the status will be. But the point is, it eliminated competition and positive voluntary activity. So my personal view is, I think there's merit in the debate, but it's not an all one-sided good without there being risks associated with quotas, is my personal view.
So Tiger, maybe just a cultural input. Germany, tough country on gender balance, as every German woman can tell you. Really, really, really hard to move the needle. And a female chancellor who's kind of on her way out. Is this her legacy push to finally get these German companies to take some of this stuff on board?
Yeah, it could be, Aviva, and you're right. It's an interesting conundrum, right? You have the chancellor as the woman, and who's had a very successful run in her role for many years now, recognized by the world. So I'm in Ronan's camp. I think a quota, a rule, basically says we've all given up. We need a referee who is gonna punish us if we don't follow a new rule that's been set. There is no conviction. There is no passion, there is no desire, there is no motivation, there is no competition. That's a very, at least in ours, I think most of us would say that's not a good world to be in, to have rules on all these things. A self-imposed rule, which is what a target becomes, which says, I'm going to competitively differentiate myself in whatever way, I think is a much better place to be in. It almost feels like, and I would agree with Ronan. I think the pricing roaming example is a fantastic example. It'll settle down to least common denominator. That's it.
Okay, so that's a pretty clear, uniform answer to Julie's question. We're going to move on then, because I think actually that is part of the how. And Charlie, I know you've been wanting to get to the how ever since we started, which is always where leaders want to get to, especially male leaders. They really just want to get to the how of this topic. So I'll ask you, what do you think is or was the most important kickoff impetus, and who does lead, and how do they signal their arrival, the shift, and the priority they want to put on it?
Okay, that's a great question. Look, I do think whether it's the CEO or the leadership more broadly, in most organizations need to have a meaningful discussion around, do they really believe in this? Get past the why and the what questions. And they really need to authentically understand what they want to try and achieve, have their own narrative for why it's important for them. And it can't be bullshit, it can't be made up. And they need to be at the core of this. And that may be a bit depressing, but organizations are designed as hierarchies. They're designed in a relatively old-fashioned leadership style. And so I think it does start in the organizations that I've seen where they've made a difference with that. And ideally it's comes from the top, the board, the CEO, or the senior leadership, but it needs a broader team to really make the difference, to make the belief, and then start to make things happen. And it needs, in the language that we care about now, quite a cross-functional team. It needs people that represents the full scope of the functionality and the dimensions of the organization that you're leading. It can't just be the business person or someone leading the big operational functional areas. It needs to be a cross-functional team in that context. So that for me is still the starting point. This debate around targets and quotas, I think I get to the same place as Ronan and Tiger. My first 5 years when I was asked to lead on this, when I was a youngish 29, 30-year-old in California. I tried to do this without targets. And I did it because I had a whole bunch of feedback from my colleagues that said, that's just positive discrimination. It's going to result in bad outcomes, all the rest of it. And I failed. And so by 2004, I'd got myself to believing that targets is the only way to make a difference. And a bit like I think Ronan was saying, interestingly, quotas on boards is very different from fundamental change in organizational development and career paths. Boards are much easier to think about how you can quickly make a change. I actually was involved with the work back in 2009 to help the UK government decide on a 35% target, not a quota. But I think targets now are fundamental in gender diversity to try and create the change. But it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. And the really interesting stuff is everything that the Tiger and Ronan and I hopefully have teed up a bit, but those guys have already talked about. You have to look at every part of the organization you're leading and think about, are we creating an environment that's inclusive, that's going to create the right development, and pull every lever, whether it's job descriptions or recruitment or third-party headhunters or how you construct the roles, pay, the ultimate opportunity, which we didn't answer yet around COVID, for flexibility, although actually at the moment we're seeing women are taking more of the burden of the home. And so it's not working under COVID for most of our employees and colleagues today. But put that aside, I think the opportunity and the hope is around the flexible working that we're creating the opportunity for. The incentives that go and how you think about incentives, the training programs. We have something called Accelerating into Leadership that we create an increased opportunity for our future female talent to take advantage of. The propositions you develop for our customers and building teams that can really represent propositions that are most attractive to women. I run the big wealth business. We have 1.5 trillion of assets under management. If you look at the growth of the decision makers in the world around the assets under management in the world, as you know, you've seen the fact, I'm sure, it's going to increasingly be decisions that women are leading on. You just have to look really cross-functionally and then start to pull all of those levers. And a lot of them are just practical, pragmatic things that start to unblock what we're talking about. I'll stop because I could talk for hours, but yeah, for me, it does start at the top, but it's not an individual, it's a team, and it's quite a fundamental shift and authentic belief in why and what we need to do.
So I'm very intrigued by this idea of its completely transversal shift, kind of like digital or safety or any other business change. Ronan, I'm just curious, why is this so different and spoken and framed so differently than any other business shift? And who should be accountable for this change?
Look, it's a complex question, and I have dived in on some LinkedIn conversations about where a chief diversity officer should exist in an organization, why it shouldn't be in the CHROs, has to be in the CEOs and the whatever. There isn't a correct answer. I think, and again, this I hope doesn't sound like it's a fudge, is I don't do gender balance. I'm sorry, I don't do it. I am in a war for talent. I build teams and I build an environment in which I genuinely aspire to create the conditions in which each individual in the organization can be the success they deserve to be. And I make no excuse for that. And so I'm not a one topic, one thing. There's no such thing as digital transformation. Respectfully, it's BS that some consultant, if they're selling it to you, is already overpaid for what they're offering you. There's no such thing. It just doesn't exist. We live. I'll
pass it over to Tiger after that.
we live in a complex world. No, we don't. We live in a reasonably simple world made complex by too much navel gazing and not enough getting on and making stuff happen. And so my simple philosophy is that my focus all the time is, if you create context, you give people confidence to exercise judgment. And that's what drives my approach to whether it's business transformation, whether it's talent transformation, whether it's whatever. What I'm trying to do as a business leader is create the context in which the people in the business understand what it is we aspire to do and why, and then afford them the space to do the thing. Because guess what? Most of the decisions shouldn't be made at the top of the organization. But if you create context what you can do is context creates inclusivity. And I'm maybe not exactly answering the question of Eva, but it kind of builds to this question from some previous questions. I'm trying to address fixed lens observation, which presumes that everything that happened is seen through one fixed lens. And the reality is everything that happened means different things to everybody who was around. It's generally the men who enjoy the fixed lens observation and can all agree on what they take away from a particular situation. So if I may, it may sound an odd thing to do. Wargaming is one of the most effective tools I have found from adjusting the perspectives of male managers, because all of a sudden when role modeling is allowed and they're allowed to play someone else or be influenced by somebody playing someone else, all of a sudden they're exposed to the reality that not everybody thinks like them, not everybody behaves like them. And guess what? They may just have been outmaneuvered by a competitor in a war game situation. They actually grow up quite quickly. Even the boys in short trousers grow up quite quickly in situations like that.
So wargaming to educate managers, there's a nice idea. Tiger, maybe just a slant on what do men think about you? Ronan was talking about perspectives and how people see. How have you managed men's perceptions of this whole topic, or was that not anything you needed to manage and there wasn't a backlash and everybody bought in very easily?
No, I think it's fair to assume that there would be questions, including questions of, is this just talk, or is this person going to walk the talk? So to some extent, I do agree with Ronan, it needs to pervasively move through the organization. However, I do believe that leaders need to signal seriousness in areas that only they can do it. So as an example, the board. You got to be able to have a board composition that reflects what you think signals the right set of diverse minds in the boardroom of all kinds. And that part I agree with Ronan. So I remember 8 years back, our board of 11 had 0 women. Now we have 4 out of 11, on our way potentially to 5. And I agree with Charlie, that's just one aspect, and the glass is always half empty. If I look at my leadership team, again, a decision that I can't say anyone else can take. I have to be central to my leadership team decision making. 10 years back, 1 woman out of 14. Today, 6 out of 13. I have lesser leaders, but 6 out of 13. And that was a very conscious, and everyone saw that. And now, when I talk to people, they say, actually, it has made a difference to the way we run the business, to the way we deal with clients. It's actually helped the business create better solutions. So then they have to follow. The one last thing that we did that I think has made a big difference to us is, again, we think one of the real life challenges that women face, which all of us would agree with, is life events that sometimes takes them out of the workforce by their own volition. How do they re-enter back is something that we realized was a big question. And we said, wow, what an opportunity to get an ex-McKinsey consultant, an ex-Deloitte person in our industry, all of whom have done a lot of digital transformation, to bring them back into the organization. And we realized actually that first step of trying to come back is actually not easy for them. And if we take them through the normal process that we have of hiring a leader into the company, they sometimes give up saying, this is too difficult and I think I'm not ready. The reality is that we have not taken that extra step. So what we did was change. So what did we do? We announced a 3-day program, starts at 8 in the morning and ends at the end of the 3rd day with offer letters given to women who we decided we're going to choose. We brought a whole bunch of leaders together. We hire as a group. We don't hire with 1 or 2 meetings. We hire with multiple meetings because we want multiple perspectives. But we made all of them come together. We made all the women come in. At the end of the day, we made 25 offers. We had 25 acceptances. And now that's become a part of our lateral hiring program. We've got some amazing talent coming in. So again, a little bit break some of those rules.
Break the rules, leadership, and build context. So let's take the poll results and see what the audience thinks. of accountability on this topic. And then I'll ask Naveen to give us another question. Sorry, guys, but we've got 91% for on your side. This is in your hands, so pretty clear message. Not much for that head of diversity, no matter who they report into. So a very interesting vote that I think has been corroborated by some of those consultants doing some of the research. Naveen, go ahead. What's the question?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. I think Tiger actually just answered it, but the question was around so many women taking career breaks kind of mid-career, mostly in their mid-30s, just as they're getting up towards that senior manager level. And then they either take a break or they slow down to raise a family. And that can be, you know, multiple maternity leaves. Whereas, you know, if you start off on a graduate level, you know, for me personally, for example, all of my batch mates would, you know, still continue on that trajectory, whereas I decided to take that career break. So how do you then support the women that want to come back to work after that break, or how do you help them to keep progressing through that time? Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. And I'll let anybody take that and just add to it. And what about men? And can we also let men take these breaks? And do you? And is that part of the context and culture that you've created?
And Aviva, maybe just to build on Tiger's comments and Naveen's question. So one of the experiences I had in the UK and actually built out after my time, too, was Anne Pickering, the CHRO there, actually campaigned a program which was a return to work program, which was explicitly designed along lines that Tiger described, but also included this idea of coming back to work 3 days a week, then 4 days a week, then 5 days a week. So a transition over a 3 to 6 month period back into full-time work. The other thing that I referenced is we've now made in our company, the parental leaves are exactly equal, male or female. So the choice about who is the primary care provider in the home, whether it be for childcare or actually for elderly care or other things, is completely flexible and gender neutral. But I think part-time work, and this is a challenge that we can, I think, have at different levels of the organization. But good maternity plus part-time allows people to potentially keep their hand in circumstances where they might otherwise feel that they have a complete break. And in an environment post-COVID where I think we will have genuinely more flexibility of where work gets done, I think that can be an increasing opportunity to keep that, forgive me if I don't break the umbilical cord, just keep that connectivity there if that's appropriate in the circumstances. Because I do think it is a severe break for both sides to lose some of the best talent and kind of assume that you won't get it back, as opposed to I have the tools, the skills, and the competencies to be in the way we're describing it is we want people, a multi-career employer, able to recruit people straight out of school and university, able to recruit people in the mid phase of their career, and able to recruit people and provide them adequate reward and satisfaction in the end of their career. And hopefully some of the people potentially share two of those three journey parts with us, because they come work with us. In the US, Verizon and McDonald's, probably between them, put more people through third level education than probably most of the rest of employers combine. Massive tuition reimbursement, and it's a huge opportunity for people. So McDonald's describe it as America's first job, and they're very happy to train people and see them fly the coop. I just want to hope that some of those people, when they fly the coop, will actually come back and join us in middle and senior management with even broader and diverse experience, which would be great.
Aviva, can I add two more things? Because I agree with everything that we've talked about.
Can I ask you to add two more things and then just give a short conclusion of what you've heard and what you might just want to conclude on, because we're running out of time.
Oh yeah, just very briefly then. So how we role model more senior roles, because I'm going to focus on how do we get more diversity, gender diversity in senior roles. is one of the blockers we get. So one of the things and it's obviously a male dominated space, so it's dominated by male role models in this context today, is people that want to work 12, 14 hours a day, have no flexibility, only focus on one career. And one of the things we hear, especially from women coming back from those kind of 30 to 40 life breaks, whatever they're driven by, but obviously family breaks, they look at that and they say, that's not the way I want to build my career. It's too narrow, it's too one-dimensional. And how do I get the balance in my life? So interestingly, we get a lot of, you are not role models, whether you're men or women, just how you're living your life is not the way I want to live it. And I think this theme around flexibility becomes quite personal when you start saying, well, how do you start role modeling more flexibility around how you spend your day? And if you're going to be a senior executive or you're always switched on, is your coat always on the desk? These are the things that show really bad role models for our people. The second one, which we didn't talk about, there's a massive difference across cultures. Interestingly, India is a place where we have a brilliant program of tapping into that female talent coming back from work. China, 80% of my leaderships are women. It's an amazing thing when I sit down with those teams. Their language, not mine. Real men don't do services work. So you go and you have a really, really different experience, Ronan. You're laughing. So the context in which we create those programs is huge. I think the summary, which you asked me to do, is all of us are going to sit here and say, if you don't build, and Ronan, you said it brilliantly, if you don't build an organization that's going to embrace female talent from a talent perspective, and then you ignore this amazing pool of talent of people, men or women, that have taken a life break for whatever reason and want to come back into the workplace, and don't make it easy for them, you're just going to lose out. You're going to lose out in being competitive from a talent perspective.
Tiger.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the cultural learnings that we've had, partly a joke, but partly real, is that in China, our leadership team of 14 are 11 women and 3 men. And in Romania, our leadership team of 9 is 1 poor guy. So what we've done is every once in a while, we've actually had our leaders immerse themselves in those businesses to understand what it is that some of them go through. And then they come back saying, I now understand it. So actually they get a little bit more amenable to putting themselves in the other person's shoes. We found it very, very fascinating to be able to do that, but the cultural differences are huge. Yeah.
Interesting. So the experience of gender balance to train managers and what it means. Ronan, what about your last takeaways?
So look, I'm an accountant and an ex-banker. So show me the money. Well, I have a female majority in my exco, and in my senior management, 43% female, 57% male. In the last 7 quarters, we've improved customer satisfaction by 9 points, which is pretty much world-class to move at that in distance in 7 quarters. And I'll let you into a secret. The tightest correlation between long-term value in my industry is customer sat. And I guarantee you, I wouldn't have made the progress I have made if I didn't have a strong and diverse leadership team. So that's my show me the money.
So money talks, and these CEOs has talked, and I think you have all been able to witness the passion and commitment and ferocious energy they've put in over years and decades to make this change happen. I just want you to know there's a growing number of these CEOs who exist. I think a lot of women don't know they exist. I think not enough men hear about them. And I think a lot of this topic in the 21st century will be about men telling other men that it's time to, I don't know, go to China and Romania and see how it's done. So thank you very, very much for your input. I'll hand back to Abs to conclude.
Thank you so much, Viva. Thanks, everybody. And it's an amazing galvanizing session, such a lot of energy. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from Florence, who will like to say a few words. Florence, over to you.
Thank you, Abs. Thank you, everybody. I think couldn't have asked for a better 90 minutes, even if you tried. Thank you all very much. And I think this is the time to say thank you to the participants. The chat was firing away. questions coming in. Unfortunately, we couldn't take them all due to the technology, but we will. And the time, we're all passionate. You can see the passion amongst our CEOs, amongst our moderators, and the people in the audience. So it's all very encouraging. Thank you very much. We heard about bilingualism, talent, practicalities, obstacles, culture, creating context. I think there's a lot of food for thought. What we would like to do at Balance in Business Initiative is to invite those who would like to take this a step further and perhaps have smaller group discussions to join us into that. And maybe we can take some action on some of those and help people. We will be sending out a survey, and in that is an opportunity for those of you who would like to partake in further discussions to let us know, and we will invite you to do so. I feel it's very important, and this is a fantastic start. And then as a follow-up, because this is a trilogy, the second event will take place in the spring, towards the end of March. And we invite you all to come and join us. Thank you very, very much, the speakers. I also like to thank our BIB board for the incredible support, in particular Aviva, who no less than our knowledge partner and great supporter, and Gail Lamotte, who quietly works behind the scenes and actually stepped up. Thank you very much, Gail. Also, we have an executive team with Maria Sharash, Oksana Denisenko, and Celine Infil, who are taken a part of this. Is a 375-day voluntary effort. And they are not seen here today, but they're all part. The NAA team with Francois, our president, who gives unparalleled support, and Katie Accorti and Liz McCartney. And last but not all, a very, very big thank you to Genpack for the very generous sponsorship, and for our superb host, Apsajit, who worked so hard. And I think, Apps, I hope you're pleased. I mean, this is a great success. Thank you very, very much. You worked very hard. And Dana Fry and Ledora, fantastic job. Thank you very, very much. And now I think I'll pass on. All have a good evening. You probably wanted to have your wine or dinner. Thank you very, very much for making this a great event.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Ciao then. Bye-bye.